Now, it is a little difficult to know exactly where to begin with an argument like this. I could just talk about education, for example, and say that I actually think the government's educational system produces, well, generations of ignoramuses, and each one is worse than the previous one. I mean, if government had nothing to do with education, and education was provided entirely by Walmart and Amazon, which this guy hates completely, he would be complaining, he would be up in arms, we'd never hear the end of it, of the shoddy product that's produced by Walmart and Amazon education, right? We would never hear the end of it. These kids know nothing about anything. They have major confusions about fundamental historical events. They can barely understand what the concept of 75% means. We would never hear the end of it. But because of the double standard that we so often see on the part of people who give the benefit of the doubt to government, well, to the contrary, government education is what makes all your opportunities possible. Where would you be without government education? Well, as we've noted on this program, England became the most literate society on the face of the earth with an entirely private education system. As we've seen in 2 separate episodes on this program, it turns out that around the world, in the poorest countries, students are being educated in low-cost private schools that are vastly less expensive than the government-run schools and have vastly better outcomes. Now, if that's the case, how can you justify expropriating people to fund an inferior alternative? Now, as we'll see later, this Jeff supports pretty much every federal agency there is because his elected representatives decided that these things were necessary. It really is discouraging that somebody would have such a naive confidence in people who deserve it so little. Well, these are my wise elected representatives, and they decided that these federal agencies are necessary. And these federal agencies all have nice names, right? So they must be doing what their name indicates that they must be doing. And I support that. What he doesn't seem to realize is that in case after case, these agencies, or whether could be the educational system in a state, or it could be some federal agency, they all wind up as fiefdoms looking to expand their own power and wealth and benefits at the expense of the rest of the public. And yes, that's even true of the sacred education bureaucracy. You guys have probably heard me tell the story of John Chubb, the Brookings Institution researcher, who after 13 telephone calls was finally able to get the New York City public school system to tell him that there were 6,000 bureaucrats in their central office. Then he calls the Archdiocese of New York, which educates 1/6 as many students, wants to know how many bureaucrats are in their central office. They should have 1,000 proportionately. First person answers the phone, says, "I'm sorry, I don't know how many. Let me count." The answer turns out to be 26. So this is why we can't have this inexcusable confidence in these bureaucracies, or think that this is just an accident, or it doesn't have to be the case that these bureaucracies all work this way. It doesn't have to be the case that they're obviously self-interested and they are obviously aiming at their own well-being rather than at the general public's well-being. This is how they have to work.